They handed me a folded flag and told me it stood for honor. For 50 years, I held on to that story more tightly than I ever held on to my own brother. My name is Arthur Hayes. Back in 1969, I was the one who stood straight-backed at the funeral, the one who didn't cry when they played the bugle. Michael was the hero, you see. Sergeant Michael Hayes, killed in action, and I was the younger brother left behind, tasked with the simple, impossible job of being strong for our mother. I remember the weight of that flag in my arms. The corners were so sharp, the fabric so heavy. The soldiers' white gloves were pristine, clean against the deep blue. And for a second, I thought I was going to drop the whole thing right there on the grass. In that moment, I learned what strength was supposed to look like. It was silent, it was heavy, and it didn't ask any questions. But that silence, it has a cost. A half-century of it has a way of hollowing you out from the inside. I built a monument to my brother, a perfect soldier made of pride and quiet respect, because I was too afraid to look at the real boy we lost, the one who taught me how to cast a fishing line and who had a terrible, loud laugh. I chose the hero over the human, and now I look around and I see everyone doing the same thing. People shouting their own perfect stories, their own folded flags, terrified to look at the messy, complicated truth underneath. They mistake the noise for strength, just like I mistook my silence for honor. And I have to wonder, after all this time, was that silence the greatest respect I could offer him? Or was it the cruelest betrayal of all? I'm 78 years old, and I don't know if I have enough time left to find the answer. Our town wasn't a place for big emotions. It was a factory town in Ohio built on steel and sweat, and people kept their troubles behind their front doors. But when the news about Michael came, it was different. It was like a crack had run through the whole community. You could feel it in the air, the silence at the general store, the way neighbors would nod instead of talk. They were watching us, watching my mother, of course, but watching me too. I was 23, still felt like a kid, but overnight I became the man of the house. I was Arthur, Michael's brother, the one who had to hold it all together. There was no manual for it. No one told me what to do, but I saw it in their eyes and the firm handshakes from my father's friends. They weren't just offering sympathy. They were giving me my orders. Be strong, be quiet, be the rock. It was the heaviest job I'd ever been given. The day of the funeral was cold for October, the kind of cold that gets right into your bones. I remember putting on my suit, the tie feeling like a noose. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Driving to the church, people stood on their porches, hands over their hearts. They weren't just mourning Michael, they were mourning the idea of him, the town's son, the hero, and I was his proxy. Every step I took from the car to the graveside, I could feel their eyes on my back. I focused on the details to keep from falling apart. The impossibly green grass, the sharp shine on the soldiers' shoes, the sound of their rifles firing into the sky. It was all so precise, so rehearsed. It felt less like a funeral and more like a play, and I had been cast in the lead role without ever seeing the script. My only line, I decided, was silence. A perfect, unwavering, honorable silence. The drive home from the cemetery, that's the part that really sticks with you. It was just me and my mother in the back of my uncle's car. The air was thick, suffocating. The bugle had been so loud, a piercing cry that hung over the whole valley. But inside that car, there was a quiet so deep it hurt my ears. My mother just stared out the window, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. I wanted to say something, anything. I wanted to ask her if she was okay, to tell her I missed him too, to cry with her. But the unspoken rule was stronger than any words I could think of. We had just buried a hero, and heroes don't get questioned. Their families don't get to be messy or loud or broken. We had to be worthy of the sacrifice, so we sat there, the two of us drowning in that silence, and I learned the hardest lesson of my life. that sometimes the most profound grief is the one you're not allowed to speak. For weeks after, our house was a museum of grief. Everything was in its right place, but covered in a fine dust of sorrow. The real anchor, the moment that chained me to this silence for 50 years, wasn't at the funeral. It was about a month later in our kitchen. My mother was peeling potatoes at the sink, her back to me. The only sounds were the scrape of the peeler and the slow, heavy tick of the wall clock. Michael's chair was still at the table, empty. It was like a black hole sucking all the air out of the room. I was just sitting there staring at the salt shaker, and I had this overwhelming urge to say his name, just to say it, Michael, to see if the house would fall down, to see if she would turn around. I wanted to break the spell, but the words got stuck in my throat, heavy as lead. That kitchen became a tomb, and we were the ghosts haunting it. I watched her shoulders, how they were locked so tight, and I knew she was crying without making a sound. The silent tears of a woman who had been told her son's death was a noble price to pay. And in that moment, I could have walked over to her. I could have put my hand on her back and said, "It's not noble, Mom. It just hurts." I could have told her a stupid story about Michael, about the time he fell out of the oak tree and broke his arm trying to get a kite down. I could have brought the boy back into the room just for a second, but I didn't. I looked over at the mantelpiece in the living room, where the flag sat in its polished wooden case. It watched me. It felt like a guard standing duty over our silence. And I chose the soldier over the son. I chose the monument over the memory. That was my failure. Not in a field of battle, but right there in my own kitchen. That decision, it wasn't a single event. It was a seed, and it grew. That night, I taught myself that love meant being quiet. That strength meant burying the truth under a neat, tidy story. When I met my wife, Sarah, years later, I brought that silence into our home. When our kids would ask about Uncle Michael, I'd point to the picture on the wall and say he was a hero. End of story. I built a wall around that part of my life, brick by silent brick, and I didn't realize until much later that I had walled myself in with it. My family learned not to ask. They learned that part of Dad was off limits, a room with a locked door. And it all started in that kitchen with those potatoes and that ticking clock. It was the moment I stopped being Michael's brother and became the guardian of his ghost. And it cost me almost everything. The deepest shame, the one that's been a stone in my gut for 50 years, isn't that I was sad. It's that I was a coward. I took the memory of my brother, the real, loud, messy Michael who tripped over his own feet and told terrible jokes, and I helped the world bury him twice. The first time was in the ground. The second time was under a story, a clean, respectable story about a hero. I became the guardian of that story. I'd point to his picture, recite the lines about honor and sacrifice, and feel a cold, hollow pride. But every time I did it, I was killing him again. I was choosing the perfect soldier over the imperfect brother I loved because the soldier's death made sense. It had a reason. The boy's death, that was just a theft. It was just a hole in the world. And I was too damn scared to look into it. That fear didn't stay in the past. It came home with me. It sat down at my dinner table and raised my children. My wife, Sarah, she knew. She tried in her quiet way to get me to talk. But I had perfected the art of the locked door. She'd ask a question about Michael, and I'd hand her the key to the monument, but never the key to my heart. My own kids grew up walking on eggshells around their uncle's memory. They knew he was a hero, but they never knew he was a man. They never heard about the time he tried to build a raft and it sank in Miller's Pond with both of us on it. I denied them that. I denied them the laughter. I thought I was protecting his legacy, but I was just protecting myself. I was so afraid of tarnishing his honor that I built a wall so high my own family couldn't see me on the other side. The truth is, I never finished that funeral. I'm still standing there, a 23-year-old kid with a flag in his arms that feels heavier than a car. The grief didn't go away. I just froze it. And for half a century, I've carried that block of ice inside me. It's why I could never laugh too loud or cry when Sarah passed. Part of me was still stuck in that cemetery, standing at attention. I thought that was strength, but it was just a long, slow numbness. I never properly mourned the boy who taught me how to bait a hook. I mourned a symbol, and the weight of that unspent grief for the real person has been crushing me ever since. It's a ghost in my own house, and after all this time, I'm finally realizing the ghost isn't my brother, it's me. I'm the one who's been haunting my own life. And now I turn on the television or I see my own grandchildren on their phones, and it's like the world has found its voice, but it's forgotten how to talk. It's just noise, a constant angry shouting from every direction. Everybody has a flag to wave, a perfect story they're willing to fight for, and they scream it into the other person's face. I look at them and I see myself. I see the same rigid set of the jaw, the same refusal to look at the messy parts. It's the same fear I had, the same terror of being wrong, but they wear it differently. My generation wore it as a heavy coat of silence. This generation wears it as armor, all spikes and sharp edges. But it's the same thing underneath. It's the same terror of admitting you just don't know. And it makes me wonder if our silence was any better than their noise. Both leave you so terribly alone. Back then, when we lost Michael, the whole town grieved together by being quiet together. It was a heavy blanket we all shared. You didn't have to explain your pain because everyone felt a piece of it. We didn't have answers, so we didn't pretend to. We just endured. There was a kind of humility in that. A shared understanding that some things were too big, too awful to be solved with words. But now it feels like everyone has an answer for everything. There's no room for doubt. There's no room for sadness. There's just blame. You point your finger, you shout your truth, and you don't listen. We lost something important along the way. We lost the ability to just sit together in the quiet, to be confused together. We traded shared grief for separate angers, and I think we are so much poorer for it. We've forgotten that sometimes the most honest thing you can say is nothing at all. And I see it now, clear as day. My silence and their shouting, they come from the same empty place. We were so afraid of disrespecting the dead that we built a tomb around my brother's memory. They are so afraid of being disrespected that they build fortresses around their own beliefs. Both are a betrayal. My silence didn't honor Michael. It erased him. And their noise doesn't build a better world. It just tears this one apart, piece by piece. You can't love a person or a country or an idea if you're not willing to ask the hard questions, if you're not brave enough to sit with the uncomfortable answers. I spent 50 years protecting a story. I see people doing the same thing every day, just a lot louder. And I have to ask myself, what happens when all the stories are shouted down and all that's left is the silence that follows a war? Because that's where this is headed. I can feel it in my bones. It all came to a head last Tuesday. My grandkids, they were in the living room going at each other over something on the news, shouting, so certain, so angry. And in their faces, I saw the same terror I'd carried my whole life, but they were wearing it differently, as armor. That night, the silence in my house was heavier than ever. I finally understood that it wasn't peace. It was a prison I had built for myself. I got up, went to the old dresser in my bedroom, and dug out the wooden box from the bottom drawer. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling, and for the first time in 50 years, I unfolded that flag. The sharp creases were still there, like old scars, and I made a choice. I decided to break my own rule. I called my oldest granddaughter, Emily, into the room. I was going to tell her the whole story, not the hero story, my story, the one about being afraid. And the most incredible thing happened. I told her everything about the kitchen, about my mother's silent tears, about how I was too much of a coward to just put my arm around her. I confessed my failure, and when I looked up, she wasn't looking at me with disappointment. Her eyes were full of tears, but they weren't for the great uncle she never met. They were for me. For the grandfather who had carried that stone in his gut alone for so long. She reached out and just held my hand, and in that quiet room, 50 years of ice began to melt. That's when I learned the lesson that had been waiting for me all this time. True honor isn't about building a wall around a memory to protect it. It's having the courage to walk inside, to face the messy, complicated truth, and to share it. That connection with her was more real than any monument I ever built. It was a kind of peace. So I'm asking you, sitting there, listening to an old man ramble, what's your folded flag? We all have one. It might not be a real flag tucked away in a wooden box. It could be a story you tell about your family, a belief you've never dared to question, a loyalty you hold so tight it leaves marks on your soul. It's that one thing you keep neat and tidy and safe on a shelf because you're terrified that if you unfold it, if you look at all the creases and the stains, the whole thing will just fall apart. I know that fear. I lived inside it for half a century. I thought I was protecting my brother's honor, but all I was really doing was protecting myself from the pain of the truth. But that silence, it doesn't protect anything. It just starves it. It starves the love, the memory, the very thing you think you're honoring. It just leaves you alone in the quiet, guarding an empty box. Don't make the mistake I did. Please don't wait 50 years to have the conversation that actually matters. This world will tell you that asking hard questions is an attack, that showing your doubt is a sign of weakness. It isn't. It's the ultimate act of love. It's the bravest thing you can do. It's saying, I love this memory, this person, this country enough to want to know the whole truth about it, even the parts that hurt. Find that person you've been silent with, your son, your father, your oldest friend. Take a deep breath and just unfold your flag. Show them the messy parts. Show them your fear. You might just discover that the weight you've been carrying all this time wasn't the flag itself, but the terrible, crushing strain of holding it so perfectly folded for so long. My name is Arthur Hayes, and I was Michael's brother. It took me a lifetime to learn how to say that right. Don't let it take you that long.